I see people are joining. Hello, hello. All right, so I suppose we're going to start. So my name is Polina Викторовна, and I'm going to be your reading host today. I remember how I read to some of you a month ago, and we started with the bloody history of Britain. And once we had the voting, people were quite happy to continue reading the very bloody history of Britain. So we are here today to read more from this book. We have quite a cozy group of people. So if you ever want to ask a question or maybe comment on something that I'm going to read to you, so raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. Okay, I think we have time for this today. We don't need to finish we have 2 chapters today to read. We don't have to finish the last one, so we are simply enjoying the process of reading and talking about the language. Okay, so I believe we can start. Hang on. Okay, so we're going to start with chapter 8 today, Chaos, 1135. This bit of history goes crazy. Henry I was a king for 30 years and married to a Matilda, as was his father. When he died in 1135 from an overindulgence in lampreys, little eels, he left only 1 legitimate heir and 20 who weren't. Her name was also Matilda, and although only recently a widow, her dad made her marry 14-year-old Geoffrey Plantagenet Falk. What a mouthful of Anjou. The deal was that when she eventually became queen, it would expand the family empire. Well, quite a story here, guys. So we have quite a few Matildas. You see how a girl, once a widow, was asked to marry another heir to the throne. And you also see quite a tight relationship between England and France. And I bet in those days, they weren't really that separate as they are now. A couple of words for you here in the paragraph. So he died from an overindulgence. If we allow ourselves something too much, I'm not sure we can die from it, but we might get a little bit of a stomachache, let's say. You can have an overindulgence in ice cream, for example, in summertime, something like that. Another interesting expression for you here, what a mouthful. That you might think that means something negative, but actually that is quite the opposite. So that would be someone who's telling the truth. And notice how this author in this book makes his comments in brackets, which might be quite funny. So here we go again. Henry's nephew, Stephen, I have highlighted this PH for you, as in this particular word, in spite of the words philosophy and physics, it comes with the sound B. Stephen had other ideas and told a huge fib. He informed everyone that Uncle Henry had told him on his deathbed that he wanted Stephen to be king. When safely under the crown, just to confuse everybody, he married another Matilda. Perhaps the name Matilda was the 12th century equivalent of Tracy. All right, so in this highlighted expression, told a huge fib, I hope you recognize the word fib. Although you might not know it, but I think you can guess it from context. Yeah? Yeah, that's a lie, right? And the actual joke comes in the final sentence of the paragraph. Perhaps the name Matilda was the 12th century equivalent of Tracy. So the popularity of this name, I mean Matilda, was quite high. Okay, at least the historian that we are reading now thinks so. Anyway, there was a huge argument followed by a civil war in which everyone pinched each other's castles and Matildas. Okay, you might have heard of a pinch. You can have a pinch of salt, for example, a little bit of something. But when you pinch someone's castle, that means you take it from a person and then perhaps someone else takes it from you. Okay, so it's a little bit of a takeover that happens when a civil war breaks up. Okay, 1135, civil war. Geoffrey died, and his son Henry, another one, took over the fight. Confused yet? He, that's still the other one, then married Eleanor of Aquitaine, the ex-wife of Louis VII of France, who was so cross he joined forces with Stephen, another Henry's son. You remember that, right? If anyone's still keeping up with this, please let me know. So yeah, so the history of Britain might be quite confusing. So if you are an ardent historian, or maybe an ardent historian to be, that's a good idea to keep a track of all these Henrys, Geoffreys, and Stephens, of course. To cut a long story short, Henry and Stephen did a deal. In 1135, at the Treaty of Westminster, it was agreed that Stephen should stay king for the rest of his life, and then Henry could have a go, which sounded rather fair, if you ask me. This turned out to be brilliant for Henry, because Stephen killed over a year later. None of the Matildas were ever heard of until centuries later in Australia, of all places where one was believed to have invented the waltz. So we're going to stop here for a quick comment. So when Stephen killed over, here you might guess that something bad happened to Stephen. Actually, something fatal. He died. So usually when something, not someone, but something kills over, imagine that there is a ship in front of you and the front part of this ship goes down like that. So that would be a keel over. So here we are using it as a metaphor. Well, not we are using it. The writer of this book is using that as a metaphor to say that basically Stephen died. Now, a little bit about this Matilda and the waltz. I wonder if there is a person here who knows the story about Matilda and the waltz in Australia. Is there anyone? Okay, if there is, you can write what you know in the comment now, okay? So it is believed that Australia has two anthems. One is the official, played over the ceremonies of different kind, and then there is another one. Okay, yeah, I see the comment coming. Let's see what we have in there. Okay, so the waltz in Australia at some point back many years ago, when the first prisoners started to go to that continent, is believed to be invented by some Matilda, and that is we can say almost a folk tune that is known by quite a few Australians, I would say by most of them, and it is known as the Waltz of Matilda, okay, or Matilda Waltz. And I think you can YouTube it and listen to it. You might like it. Well, this is a second anthem, non-official, of Australia, so you might give it a go. 1154, Henry II. So Henry II copped the lot. Copped the lot, got what he wanted to. Okay, so England was left to him. Okay, all of England and most of it left, and a handbit of France was left to Henry II. Best of all, nobody wanted to fight him for it. The first thing he did was to demolish all Stephen's unlicensed castles. Hands up, who knows what a castle license looks like? Then, instead of using the feudal nobility, the barons, to keep down the English, as William the Conqueror had done, he used the English to keep down the feudal nobility. Neat, yeah? He then got rid of all the sheriffs and set up a proper legal system with judges and juries. This replaced trial by combat. Shame, really. I always thought it sounded rather a laugh and quicker. In fact, the whole system of trial and punishment at this time is worthy of a closer look, and we are going to look at it in a bit. Just a quick comment about to fight him. So nobody wanted to fight him. Maybe nobody thought themselves to be strong enough and powerful enough. Notice the difference between to fight someone and to fight with someone. So if you use that preposition, that would mean that you have some argument going on with this person, and maybe you would like physically attack the person. Okay, so yeah, lots of sense of humor this guy has. So let's look at those trials that were going on in those days. Crime and punishment. One of the best ways of finding out whether a chap, a man, a guy, was guilty of a crime was to try him by fire. The accused was made to carry a piece of red-hot iron for 3 paces, whereupon his hand was bound up, nice of that. If when it was undone, unwrapped, yeah, 3 days later, there were no blisters, he was innocent. But if he had blisters, he was punished and even killed. It might have been a smart idea to put the bandage on the other hand. Yeah, so to trick the judges, basically. Okay, a couple of things here for you to try someone by fire. Yeah, I think you can get the meaning of this from the context. If not, give me a shout. And to carry a piece of hot iron for 3 paces. So basically, well, for a couple of meters there. All right. Interesting life, guys. Interesting. Cheats and thieves were put in the stocks, which allowed all the villagers to laugh and throw rotten food at them. Football hooligans, I wonder. Now, that's interesting, what a stock can be. I had to look up this word, and yeah, someone wants to speak? Maybe not? Okay. So basically, that is a kind of a wooden holder, okay, where you have your neck fixed or your hands fixed or perhaps your feet fixed, so you can't really move. So that's why people can come over and throw rotten foods at you. Furthermore, bakers who sold stale bread, so the bread that was off, were carted around the town on a sledge with loaves tied to their necks, while fishmongers who sold bad goods would have rotting fish tied round theirs. Well, there is no fun of a drive, is it? When you ride around the city with stale and products that are off tied to your neck or body, and people would kind of point at you or rather throw rotten foods. But that's not it. I think a word to our local trading standards officers might give them some new ideas. That's another joke coming from the author. Bad priests would have to ride through the town facing their horse's backside, wearing a paper crown, the priest silly, and even better, nagging wives would be fitted with a scold's bridle, which had a piece of metal to hold their wagging tongues down. I wonder if they had one for door-to-door salesmen. Okay, so first of all, especially if you listen to the first reading, by now you would know what a nagging is, or what a nagging wife is. So a woman that very often scolds her husband, or generally a nagging person, an unhappy person, always finding fault with everything. And a scold's bridle is something, well, of a torture tool, I would even say. If you can think of a horse and the straps around its head, which is called the bridle, imagine it on the face of a person, well, in this context, a female, okay, that would basically block her mouth, yeah, from talking, or as we have it in the context here, her wagging tongue. So basically in Russian we have this expression of a tongue that has no bones in it. So that would be a wagging tongue. Okay, so this is a torture tool that somehow shuts the woman up. Well, the nagging wife, I mean. And there comes a joke again from the author saying, I wonder if we had one, meaning a scold's bridle, for door-to-door salesmen. I'm not so sure that door-to-door salesmen are very popular now, but sometimes we do get people knocking on the doors of different offices, offering different things, yeah, so that might be a case. So ears and hands were lopped off and noses slit at the drop of a hat, but torture for fun as such was forbidden. Okay, so that maybe, well, everything that I'm reading now about is quite naughty, but this bit could have been really naughty. So if you have your ears and hands lopped off, it means they're basically cut. They are taken off you at the slit at the drop of a hat. So say if your hat finishes here, so this is how your nose gets lopped off, for example, or your ears if they stick out of your head. Henry II was also to become infamous for invading Ireland and martyring his archbishop and best friend, Thomas Becket, who had been throwing his weight around. He was a great and energetic king, however, galloping from one end of his empire to the other, appearing to be everywhere at once. So when you throw someone's weight around, that means that you show a lot of your power, okay, which sometimes can be kind of quite exhausting, don't you think? Apart from having a few rebellious sons, everything went like clockwork, yet to be invented. So there was no clock in those days until his demise in 1189. Okay, so when he passed his throne on to his heir. By the way, poor Thomas Becket, that is the archbishop, wasn't to rest easy in his grave. 350 years after his death, that naughty old Henry VIII, okay, determined to have yet another go at him and had him dug up. The poor old saint's skeleton was brought before England's Star Chamber and accused of usurping papal authority. After a formal trial, which must have looked a touch weird, his bones, strangely unable to defend themselves, were convicted of high treason and publicly burned. Things never seem to go right for some people. And there's quite a touch of a natural English here, guys. So look, I think, well, this bit here, usurping papal authority, we understand, yeah? So that from context, that he overused. So he made most that he could from his papal authority, throwing his weight here and there. And when Henry VIII, you can have a look at the pic on the screens, started the trial, and we understand that that is a trial against a skeleton, and that trial looked a touch weird, a little bit weird. I love this expression. And then, of course, there is a general comment about people, because we are sometimes like that, sometimes not, depends on many things. Things never seem to go right for some people, yeah? Some people are always nagging. Some people are always unhappy about little things or big things. And what do? They let everybody know that they are unhappy. So chapter 9, Nice Richard and Horrible John. The first son, Richard the Lionheart, was handsome, kind, brave, clever, romantic, popular, and king of England, and a big bit of France. The second son, John, was ugly, cruel, cowardly, clever also, unromantic, unpopular, and only got Ireland. The other two brothers carelessly died. Well, there is another joke coming from this author. 1189, Richard the Lionheart. Strangely enough, England liked Richard, but Richard didn't seem to like England. He preferred to spend all his time on his Christian crusade, basically attacking when you think you are in the right, against the mighty Saladin, who was head of the Muslims, otherwise known as infidels, in the Holy Land. It was while he was away that he got a call telling him that brother John was revolting. He got the first ship home, but was shipwrecked near Aquiella and had to walk the rest of the way. Okay, a few comments here. So first of all, you attack when you think you are in the right. Notice the preposition in, so you can be in the right, but you can also be in the wrong. And Saladin, this is not the title. This is the name of the actual monarch of Egypt in those days. Right, okay, we have a question there. Let's go into the chat and see. Can you give us the scripts of the articles after a lesson? Honestly, sometimes I don't understand the meaning. Well, I believe that that is quite negotiable, and perhaps the team that I'm working with might consider this option, okay? I don't make a promise now, but I think they're going to think about it, okay? And of course, you can research for yourselves what the Holy Land is. So this is not a mystery land, that is a real land, and the title was once given to a country that somehow transformed for now. So there is a quick historian go and Google for you, okay, if you would like that. So you see that Richard the Lionheart, although liked by English people, wasn't really giving them good time in terms of spending time with them. He was always on the go, always traveling and fighting. And what happens? Well, his brother John wants it all for himself. So he got shipwrecked, and while strolling, I mean Richard the Lionheart, while strolling gaily, which some say he was, through Germany, he was arrested and thrown into jail. Okay, so I'm going to stop here to explain a little bit of a wordplay. So while strolling, while walking along Germany, and he was walking, that is strolling gaily, meaning in a funny, unpretentious way. And here, writer is making a comment, which some say he was. So there is also a belief, and some historians prove this belief, right, that Richard the Lionheart was gay. So that is a comment for you here in brackets. And now notice the word jail, which is spelled J-A-O-L. So now we spell the word jail quite differently. And jail that you have on your screen is a tiny bit different from the jail that people are sent to now, but I think as a synonym, that would work fine. So basically, he was captured. The greedy crowds asked the English for £3 million to get him back. Maybe from the context, you can guess that crowds, spelled with a capital letter, is somehow related to Germany, and that is a nickname for the Germans for their life to a certain kind of cabbage, right? So when you cut it, and then I think you, okay, hang on, let the cabbage might wait. Okay, no, I see no comment in that. Right, so I think they stew it a little bit, and then it kind of becomes soury, and then they eat it. Okay, so crowds or Germans, so they wanted that ransom, they wanted £3 million. While his fans were trying to raise the cash, he was kept in a secret place. After a year, his favorite minstrel, Blondel, how favorite? Maybe he was his friend. I hear you ask, toured Europe, strumming the boss's favorite tune, playing the tune, strumming, playing, yeah? Outside every castle. The Germans must have thought he was balmy. He was a little bit crazy. One day Richard joined in the chorus and was found. He eventually came home, sorted out his brother, and then, barely having time to unpack, rushed back to La Belle, France, to try to win back some of the lands lost while in prison. I love it how this author uses modern English to talk about the things from the past. So if we go up, and you would notice that how he says, they tried to raise the cash. Yeah, so this is what charities are doing now. Or later on, he hardly had time to unpack and then rushed back to La Belle, France, right? So, and I think that these are also little bits that make this text rather lively. So he didn't do badly, apart from being killed in 1199. It was a bolt from a crossbow, which curiously enough, he had introduced into France, that finished him. There's gratitude for you. The path was now clear for the dreadful John. So you know what's an arrow and a bow, okay? So crossbow is a bigger killing machine, okay? So you usually need a device to put it up, and then what you need to have inside is not an arrow, but a bolt. It's stronger, it's smaller, okay? And so that is something that it is believed Richard the Lionheart invented in France, and it killed him right in the throat. So was killed by his own invention. Now let's see, what is it about John that English people hate? King John, 1199. There you go. You see, you have a picture of Richard the Lionheart with a bolt in his neck. Seems to work fine, the picture says. Yeah, I love British humor. Now, John really was someone you wouldn't let marry your daughter. Another bit of it. A really nasty piece of work, grabbing cash from all his poor, downtrodden subjects, so that he could live in luxury and defend his French possessions. Come to think of it, I thought that was what royalty was all about. He was always bad at battles. They didn't call him soft sword for nothing, and lost most of them. He murdered Arthur, his young nephew, in 1203 because he had a better claim to the throne, and got into such trouble that in the war that followed, he lost nearly all of what remained of his French dominions. He was always watching his back, as he was convinced all his men were trying to kill him. You can't really blame him, however, because they were. Okay, a couple of things here. Downtrodden subjects. So subjects, people, downtrodden, subjects who were already under the power of John, and were submissive and sheepish and ready to do everything that he asked his people to do. Okay, so they were quite unhappy under his rule. What do we have then? We have this nickname that he got, Soft Sword, and you have a picture of King John with his soft sword. So he wasn't known as a great fighter, was he? So we don't know for sure, at least here in this source, we realize that no, he wasn't that smart in a battle. Okay, and of course this interesting way of putting it, so that you instantly start disliking King John, although there is no reason to dislike him really, so he lived so long ago from us. Really, John was someone you wouldn't let marry your daughter. Okay, so I think that piece of humor is a bit of something. So what else about King John? His favorite hobby was extorting money from his subjects, which hacked off the public more than anything else. Then, just to put the tin lid on it, he upset the church and was excommunicated, not allowed to talk to God. This didn't worry John too much, not being much of a churchgoer, but he did, out of spite, grab all the church possessions. A couple of good expressions here again. In the first line, we have hacked off the public, so people were sick and tired of him and his rule. And to put the tin lid on means to make things even worse. He upset the church and was excommunicated. A very interesting expression here. So remember, in our history, we had the writer, what was his name? Leo Tolstoy. I think at some point in his life, he was also excommunicated from the church, right? So he wasn't allowed to talk to God in a way. Okay, let's start the second paragraph. A bunch of parents, fed up with the fine mess John was getting the country into, rebelled and captured London. Can you imagine? London was captured, and made him stick his seal on the Magna Carta in 1215. The famous document not only pointed out what a cock-up he and his ancestors had made of ruling, but also greatly reduced his enormous power. Now, sealing was one thing, but as he was a fully paid up creep, getting him to change his ways was a different matter. Okay, so again, another reminder for you of Magna Carta, 1215. To make a cock-up of something means to bring it to the ruin, to spoil it. And his ancestors, including John himself, made a cock-up of a rule. However, yeah, okay, so he did sign Magna Carta, or as we have it in here, he stuck his seal on it. However, as he was a fully paid up creep, so he was the king and he wanted to have certain things his own way, I don't think he was ready to change his ways. That was quite a different matter. In the end, the rebels invited Prince Louis of France to come and sit on our throne. What cheek, that means how clever, which he tried for 5 minutes in 1216. A long civil war followed, but John died that very year. How did he die? We are going to learn about it in a second. John's enemies nearly killed themselves laughing when, number one, John had to watch most of his baggage train with all his precious jewels disappear under quicksands in the wash. This certainly disproves the old saying, everything comes out in the wash. Now, the wash is a place in Lincolnshire where the North Sea meets the local river, and the tide is very high, so no wonder why all his baggage train disappeared in that wash. And of course, there is another expression that says everything comes out in the wash. And you can immediately imagine that when you have your trousers washed, or maybe a skirt or a dress with pockets, suddenly you see things coming out of those pockets, right? So in the washing machine window, oh, there is a banknote bill, or maybe other things dropping out. Okay, so that is another expression for you, to come out in the wash. And King John, that is the point number 2, King John, famous for his disgusting feeding habits, literally ate himself to death in 1216. Well, that is an unpleasant thing indeed. I mean, the way King John died. He died of dysentery, okay? So he had a diarrhea that went for days, and that's how he was finished, as we had written in some other pages. Well, a couple of dates for you here from those times. 1100s, knives and forks were brought back from the Crusades. Who says Saladin's lot were barbarians? Okay, so maybe they were even more developed. Well, I'm sure they were than Britain in those days. 1120, the Chinese invented playing cards. Now we know how to spend time in the trains if we are going somewhere, although I don't think we're going anywhere this summer. 1130, Court of the Exchequer formed, and there comes a joke. A huge checked tablecloth was laid out, and coins were placed in the squares to help the court count incoming revenue. Okay, so there is this, again, wordplay of the checked tablecloth and the Exchequer, the Ministry of Finance, right? 1140, spices and pepper used in Britain for the first time. Yay! You have a nice picture here of the Brits in those days. So that's the new fangled pepper, is it? 1180, glass windows were used instead of brick ones. I bet that improved the view. Can you imagine having a window made of bricks? Is it a window if it's made of bricks? I don't think so. 1180, first windmills seen in Europe. 1185, Oxford University began. 1209, just like the boat race, Cambridge came second. That is another cultural comment. Very often when there is this boat race, if Cambridge takes the second place, this is what the commentator says. Oxford takes the first place, Cambridge comes second. So there is, you can see it here in this context. 1214, Bacon invented. But now there is a correction. Roger Bacon, not the one that you thought is on the side of your omelette. He was a great scientist, predicting automobiles, ocean liners, and airplanes. So clever, in fact, that his monkmates called him a heretic and eventually threw him into jail. Okay, so that's the bloody history, the very bloody history of Britain for you. Any questions, guys? I think we can have a chat maybe for a minute or two, if you would like that. If not, then maybe you can have some questions about the campaign. If you are interested in talking to some representatives, you see their contacts on the screen for you. Does anyone want to join in a conversation? Thanks a lot. I've already found the book in the... Yeah, that's good for you. Yeah, that's good for you. It is a very good book. I even believe that it is not so much about reading it at length, but I would rather say reading it bit by bit and trying to stop and think after every second paragraph. What allusion is that, or what potential meaning does a certain phrase carry? Yeah, because the writer, through the usage of the language that he applies, takes you back and forth. So he uses very modern expressions to talk about the times they're all lost and forgotten. Okay, so thank you very much then, and I'm going to meet some of you next Wednesday. We're going to have another read, another go. Bye-bye.